I think as book lovers, we all have this kind of indescribable, uncategorizable, strange liminal experience with certain books in which we sort of put them down midway through the reading experience with the idea that we're going to come back to them. And they're not DNFs in that sense of like, I'm done with this book, fling it across the room, cleanse the space, and recover from the scatological woundedness of the experience. But we have those books that we think, you know what, it's right now, it's just not working, but I will return to this. I really will. It's one of the most satisfying feelings to come back and climb that mountain peak that you just didn't have the wherewithal to conquer, at some earlier stage of your life. So that's what today's video is about. Those books that we put down at one stage or another, but didn't give up on. They sort of eyeballed us judgingly from the shelves for years perhaps, and then we came back and we got through the end of them. Let me know about books that have been that sort of prolonged reading experience for you. How did your own personal evolution impact or inflect the encounter with that book? I'm very curious to hear other people's experiences with this. I've got 10 here of books in that category that I've finished reading, but it took me years to finish. And most of them are mammoths. Let's dive into it. First up, we've got Bleak House by Charles Dickens. Now, for those of you that watch my channel regularly, I'm a big fan of Charles Dickens. He is the one guy who can be maudlin, but I still love him for it. He can be cheesy, but he gets away with it because of the soaring power and resonance of his work, the way that he touches our innermost being and teases out our empathy, our radical interpersonal connection of actually seeing another's suffering and the hidden pain and endurance that so many human beings have gone through that shapes who they are. Bleak House is Dickens' biggest book. It clocks in at more than 1,000 pages. And for me, this book fits with this list because I picked it up once or twice several years ago, and it's got this really sort of whirlwind, misty, rapid-paced, helter-skelter opening. I think you have to really be willing to trudge through those winding alleys and kind of damp and sordid London streets, the crumminess, the squalor. You have to push through that to enter this real labyrinth of a novel. And what is also challenging about Bleak House is that it is a book about the breakdown of communication in this kind of superstructure of our laws and our juridical practices and the fine print that defines our lives and compartmentalizes us by class, opens and closes doors according to who has the knowledge, the access to the realms of discourse that enable one to dismantle barriers or have the barriers slammed forever in one's face. But there is such density and paradoxical nonsense to so much of that vast mesh of legal codes and subclauses and the jurisdictions and the endless paper trail and the contingencies and the precedent or lack of precedence that just are this sprawling monstrosity, this cacophony of noise. And it's just language, but language that inhibits clarity, language that mystifies, that forecloses communication between human beings. So there's a deep, pervasive irony in this book, and it has to be a big, hefty, garrulous tome. The form has to fit that, because the content is about this unending, unutterably dry and eviscerated legal case, Jarndyce versus Jarndyce, that has been going on for multiple generations and has everybody, tied up in litigation. But it's also about London, the myriad lives that are wound up and bound up, and the different sort of registers of language and the inaccessibility of different kinds of people to make contact with one another, all of that and much more. And I think that those opening gambits of the novel really thwarted me at first, but I came back to it with a yearning and an appetite to get into this novel, and it was so worth it. I highly recommend Bleak House. Don't be perturbed by the vastness of it. It is an absolutely exquisite masterpiece of modern malaise of life in these mega cities, and the alienation and loneliness of individuals competing for meager returns in these vast networks of laws and streets. So brilliant how he actually creates energy and forward momentum in spite of the scale and scope and sweeping kind of kaleidoscopic nature of this text. So I put it down a couple of times, came back to it, and flew through it actually when I was ready for it. Next, we've got The Collected Stories of Grace Paley. Now, this is an amazing Jewish-American writer of the 20th century that I think is criminally underrated. I don't hear her talked about very much on YouTube, so please let me know if there are other people that talk about Grace Paley. Sublime humorist, so wry and ironizing, and just knows how to dig into all of the foibles and absurdities of family dynamics and city against city life. You can see the cover here from this beautiful Virago edition with the kind of tenement, New York tenement and the stairwells. I mean, she was writing about the grimy sort of subterranean existence of working people in New York City in the mid 20th century, and the power of humor to transform misery and to see the kind of wild incongruity of life, but still find meaning and value in it. And it took me a long time to finish because there are 3 collections, and I was just savoring them. I didn't want it to end. Grace Paley didn't publish like an enormous body of work, so there is some poetry, there is kind of like journalism and like deadline prose, but her stories were her bailiwick. That was really her at the kind of zenith of her powers. I'm sad that I finished it, but I will definitely be rereading this, and absolutely check her out if you haven't. Next, now again, if you watch my channel, you know that we talk about Franz Kafka quite regularly. And but I haven't actually talked about this particular volume. This is the Essential Kafka. Good old Wordsworth livery here, Wordsworth Classics. This has The Trial and The Castle and Metamorphosis and Other Stories. So it's not complete Kafka, but it is a lot of his major works. I've read it all besides maybe 1 or 2 letter collections and some of his diaries. I haven't read like a complete diaries or correspondence of Kafka, but I'm conversant in his work, but it's a struggle, man. Kafka is hard, there's this strange contrast between the kind of limpidity of his prose in a sense, like the sentences are transparent, but you just go down the rabbit hole, like semantically, it's all over the place. There's an impenetrability, a kind of mystifying, strange, inadvertent, and uncanniness to everything that Kafka did that is just always slipping out of your reach. There's an oscillation, there's an anxiousness, an unctuousness even. There's these kind of leering, sycophant type characters that are chilling in their lecherousness. But there's just also these like endlessly garrulous conversations that reel on and on or reel out, spin out of control for pages and pages and pages that just don't really go anywhere. And it took me a long time to read for that reason, that Kafka is, obviously he was a genius, but like it's not really fun. It's quite heavy going. And I read The Trial in 2015. I think I read the Metamorphosis 2016, and then I've since reread most of the short fiction in his collected stories. The Castle was the last one I read. I just needed a break from Kafka, and it was a slog. The Castle, I think, is him at his most abstruse. This introduction is a very good introduction to this Kafka edition by the translator John Williams, and he actually has this great little list here, doesn't he, if I'm not mistaken? Yeah, he has the suggestions for further reading, and this is what he lists: Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett, The Outsider by Albert Camus, Bleak House by Dickens, The Nose by Gogol, Notes from Underground by Dostoevsky, 1984 by George Orwell, The Birthday Party by Harold Pinter, and Nausea by Jean-Paul Sartre. So having read those texts, it's quite an interesting sort of collation, because they're all in that they all have this irreducible, nightmarish, surreal, smoky, spooky, shadowy elements to them in some way, in terms of the atmosphere and the ambience of those books. But the castle was unfinished famously ends on this like unfinished sentence, but it just could go on and on forever. Kay is the central character, and he's just never going to get into the castle. That's not a spoiler, because I think it's just Kafka. Like, there is no plot. It's just this endless like back and forth of just babbling between characters, saying, well, if we send this letter, maybe then we could get admittance. Yes, but that letter actually stipulates something else. Okay, well, maybe if we can like signify our intent by redirecting our strategy towards the soft side of these officials. Well, yeah, no, but this official actually prefers if you, fill in extra formulas. Well, okay, we tried the extra letters. Yes, but did you actually attach that like subclause? Well, maybe we can do that. And it just goes on and on and on. It is horrifying and really a trudge. But obviously, I was happy to finally get all the way through the essential Kafka. This is Sylvia Plath, Johnny Panic in the Bible of Dreams. Now, I love Plath's poems, and obviously her one novel, The Bell Jar, is, I don't love The Bell Jar. Can you love The Bell Jar? It's certainly an impressive debut by a precocious young writer. But obviously Plath tragically died in her early 30s and didn't leave a huge amount of work for posterity. And so we're very happy to have Johnny Panic in the Bible of Dreams. And it's actually like it's a collection of her sort of almost ephemera, like deadline prose that she dashed off for glossy teen magazines. Believe it or not, that's how she actually paid the bills early on in her career. And other, it's a real miscellany of pieces. And I think it took me a long time to finish because of that unevenness. The first section is quite impressive. In fact, the part one is titled "The More Successful Short Stories and Prose Pieces." Really good stuff, like brilliant. The $15 Eagle, Johnny Panic and the Bible of Dreams itself, America, like great satirical, subversive humor. But then there's also, things that are a little more stodgy, a little on the amateurish side, which is understandable. So, but definitely check it out if you're a fan of Plath. So I put it down a couple times when I got a bit bogged down in the bits that she was writing with her left hand, so to speak. I pushed through eventually when I was feeling a bit more sort of braced for the mundane, as it were, and came back and finished that. Next, I've got David Sedaris, Theft by Finding, Diaries, Volume 1. It's a book of 500 odd pages by the American humor writer David Sedaris. He is unbelievably funny. He just writes like these kind of essayistic vignettes about his family and friends and the absurd jobs he's done in his life. He became a very successful writer. He's still alive. He's in his 70s, I think, now, and he lives in the countryside in England. He's one of the most successful living writers. I don't hear him talked about all that much on YouTube, to be honest. This took me a long time to finish. You really fly through it. His diaries are great. The one caveat I would say is that I don't think it's a really raw and sort of open-hearted kind of collection of diaries. I love writers' diaries and letters, but this is very censured. It's clearly been heavily edited to just include a lot of funny anecdotal stuff. It doesn't have a huge amount of the gore and saltiness of family feuds and that sort of thing. It feels quite pared down to be like a digestible, sort of, comical, fun summer read, and we can't complain about that. I mean, he's great. I really, really love Sedaris, and I've read pretty much everything that he's published. But I would have flown through this, but I actually lost my copy, and when I was moving house from England to the Netherlands, from Lincoln to Amsterdam. several years ago in the sort of late summer of 2018. And I just couldn't bring all my books with me, so I ended up leaving this behind, and then found a secondhand copy not so long ago, maybe last year, and then finally got to finish reading it. So now this one I'm going to just touch on quite quickly because I have made a video in which I talked about this book. Got the complete stories of Clarice Lispector, Brazilian writer. This one is translated by Katrina Dodson. Big, fat, comprehensive volume of all of her short stories. But there is an unevenness to this as well. Her early stuff has a juvenile feel to it, understandably so. Then she really hits her stride. And I mean, one of the Covert Joy, the collection Covert Joy, is one of my all-time favorite short stories. It's elliptical, but so searingly adroit and freighted, forceful, impactful short fiction. But then again, in her later stages, she was this kind of disgruntled, disaffected, not in the best health, and a bit kind of fed up with the literary world, and wrote these rambling, venomous pieces that are almost like anti-literature. So like one of them it's called Brasilia. It's just this guttural outpouring of like rhetorical bitterness, really. There's a sourness to it, and yeah, it's quite sad. I mean, she also wrote many novellas, which I think that shorter form suits her. But yeah, I just paced myself through this one and left a bit of time between individual volumes. Next, this is one of my all-time favorite books, and it is the collected essays of James Baldwin in this beautiful Library of America edition. I've also talked about this a couple of times on the channel. I spaced out the reading of these individual volumes. There are 5 separate individual works collated into this omnibus edition, and then there's about 200 pages at the back of other essays, so sort of magazine articles and reviews that he wrote, which were surprisingly funny. I also got a bit bogged down towards that end. I sort of thought, 200 pages of uncollected short reviews, newspaper articles, things that he sort of dashed off to pay the bills. But there's that formal constraint of seeing an exceptionally gifted writer having to work against the clock and review some, slop that he was given by a newspaper editor is actually very entertaining. Baldwin is quite mordant and scathing in some of these reviews. So once I got into the swing of it, I really enjoyed and devoured that last section. But these are just absolutely superlative, firebrand, rhetorically combative non-fiction writings, prose writings about the state of racial injustice in America, and the hypocrisies of the sort of American superstructure. All right, let's do these last 3 quite quickly. I've got George Saunders, A Swim in a Pond in the Rain. Now, the subtitle of this is In Which 4 Russians Give a Masterclass in Writing, Reading, and Life. Now, I had this book on my shelf for a few years before I really got into it, and then I got bogged down a couple of times because Saunders has obviously got this. He's a very celebrated contemporary writer who is known for the sort of high experimental seriousness, but then also with this playful, quirky Americana kind of feel. And he has taught for decades at the Iowa Writers Workshop, MFA, which is one of the most exclusive and sought-after postgraduate writing programs in the States. And in his preface to this, he says, I have assembled 20 years of teaching experience on short story writing, on fiction writing. And I was like, whoa, you're really, really enticing me. But I think the marketing of the book was not quite accurate, because it does have this folksy life lesson feel to it, how we can learn about endurance and survival in the face of a sort of a bleak and uncaring universe, that soulful soaring of 19th century Russian literature, which I love, by the way, but it's just not what I came to this text for. I came to this text for that technical, erudite craft workshop kind of feel. And there was some of that, but not quite enough for my liking. individual stories, the Russian stories, are worth reading, or like for me, I was rereading these, but they're all masterpieces, especially Master and Man by Leo Tolstoy is one of the best short stories. Also the Chekhov stories of In the Cart and Gooseberries are just phenomenal, and The Nose by Nikolai Gogol. So if you are a Russophile, I wouldn't quite categorize myself as that, but I love, all of the great works of literature that I can get my hands on, and this is him going through these stories and then discussing them in quite a capacious, spaced out way. They're not short chapters, they're like long and extensive chapters with, like I said, that kind of bluesy, blue jeans, life lessons spun in, which was not quite what I was hoping for. But I had to put it down a couple of times and come back to it reinvigorated. And look, I'm happy to have it. I'm happy that I pushed through. We've got P.G. Wodehouse, the Jeeves omnibus. This is a big fat omnibus of three P.G. Wodehouse, Jeeves and Worcester novels. I've got Thank You, Jeeves, The Code of the Worcesters, and The Inimitable Jeeves. Now, P.G. Wodehouse is a riot. He's very, very funny, just absurdly improbable, and I think his humor really functions in this reversal or inversion of expectations. So things that should be serious, like someone's house burning down, is treated with flippancy and frivolity, and then something so minor like having the wrong dining utensils and cutlery is then this like existential crisis. That's a little bit how the humor functions. Obviously, it's been immortalized by Hugh Laurie and Stephen Fry on the television series. So check that out as well if you find P.G. Wodehouse, or maybe you're probably familiar with the TV series. Check out the books. He wrote dozens and dozens of P.G. Wodehouse books. And there's a subtle criticism of like class inequality and the kind of flabby, airheaded vapidity of like the landed gentry, and their sense of being so out of touch with reality is really a ploy or a function that is really utilized for comic effect. Why did it take me long? Because I think it's a little bit samey. You can read, these are not the only three P.G. Wodehouse novels I've read. He also has short story collections, and not only this comedy duo of Jeeves and Worcester. By the way, Bertie Worcester is the 25-year-old multimillionaire that's never done a day's work in his life. And Jeeves is his manservant, his butler, that sort of he's a bit of a handler. He just like takes care of all of the calamities that Worcester finds himself entangled in. It gets a bit repetitive, it's formulaic, it's a winning formula, and made P.G. Wodehouse a rich man in his lifetime. But I just needed a break. I just felt like they were all blending into one a little bit. And lastly, I've got the complete poems of Philip Larkin, published by FSG and edited by Archie Burnett. Now, Larkin's mature work, his like mature essay collections, and by the way, he also wrote novels, which are very underrated. We'll talk about that some other time on the channel. But his mature collections of poems are really wafer thin, like High Windows, The Wits on Weddings, those are the best two. But then, how can this book be so heavy and so extensive? Well, that is because Archie Burnett just dug up every fragment and scrap of, juvenilia that he could find, doodlings and little short ditties that were extracted from letters to friends, and it is absolutely obsessively complete and detailed with notes for all of the poems. But most of that sort of backlog of childish work is just so inane and dull and derivative. It's really, really, really tiresome. And Burnett's editing as well is quite haughty and catty as well. He's very like correcting like the tiniest little mistakes that other editors have made. Look, it's obviously like it's good to correct mistakes, but somehow the tone of his corrections of other collected poems seemed a bit high and mighty to me. So it was really tough going, but obviously I wanted to be a completist in Philip Larkin. He's one of my key writers, so pushed through after putting it down a couple times, and eventually got all the way through it. Those were the 10 books that it took me years to finish reading. Let me know what yours are. I hope you enjoyed this video, and see you all soon.